All right, good morning or good afternoon, depending on where everyone is. Welcome to the panel on the future of governance in Gaza. We are very pleased to have with us today William Morris of the Next Century Foundation, Jafar Al-Ahmar from Al Hayat newspaper, and Hillel Schenker of the Palestine-Israel Journal. I've given these very brief introductions, and I hope that our panelists will introduce themselves at more length. But to kick things off now, we will begin with the panel presentations, and then we will open it up to Q&A partway through the session. So there you are, Mr. Morris.
Okay, well, we'll let Jaffa was going to speak first. So we'll let him come in and then I'll follow. Jaffa.
Give me a few seconds, please, because I'm just adjusting something, if you don't mind.
All right. Do you want me to go first, Jaffa?
Yeah, go first, then I'll
Okay, all right. So you have the less radical speaker first. This is William Morris from Next Century Foundation, with his wife, Veronica, keeping me in check so that I behave myself. And I've traveled many, many times to Gaza in my life. I mean, but not obviously in in the last year or so. But I'm very familiar with Gaza. I have many friends there, one of whom...
May I intervene now? I found it. I can speak if you like.
Oh, wow. Okay. Jaffar's going to come in and we will... Jafar Lahma, who is a dear Anglo-Lebanese friend, and he's actually head of the NCF in the UK. What else is Jafar? He's a commentator on radio and television, frequent appearer, was with Al Hayat until comparatively recently. And very, like most of us, very close to Gaza and very intimately concerned with what's going on in Palestine and Israel at the moment. And so Jaffa, ahlan wa sahlan.
Okay, thank you very much. And ladies and gentlemen, first and foremost, I would like to express my gratitude to the organizers for providing me with this opportunity to discuss this complex issue, the ongoing conflict in the Middle East, particularly in the light of the prolonged war in the Gaza Strip. Now, as we convene today, the war in Gaza enters its 7th month, marking it as the longest-standing conflict between Israel and the Palestinians. Regrettably, it has resulted in the loss of over 33,000 Palestinian lives, predominantly women and children, with tens of thousands more sustaining injuries. Tragically, approximately 1,500 Israelis have also lost their lives. Yet, it is imperative to acknowledge that this conflict transcends the current war. It spans over 7 decades. So why has this conflict persisted for so long, claiming hundreds of thousands of victims, including fatalities, injuries, and displaced individuals? And why have numerous resolutions, initiatives, and agreements failed to hold this ongoing tragedy? So as you see, I'm having a historical view on this conflict. So we must confront these questions candidly and objectively, without bias or evasion. Identifying the underlying causes and roots of the conflict is the essential first step. While each side may present its narrative, honesty and objectivity demand an acknowledgement of the fact. One such fact is that the conflict did not originate, as I said, on October 7th, 2023, nor is confined solely to the Gaza Strip. Therefore, any approach to resolving it must consider events predating this date. I urge each of you to delve into these details as they are crucial to understanding the conflict. And I'm not going to go to details. But key terms, I have to mention, only key terms often overlooked but pivotal to grasping the conflict nuances include occupation, settlements, refugees, Al-Aqsa Mosque, and UN resolutions 194 regarding the right of return, 242 and 338 regarding Israeli withdrawal from occupied territories. Now, these terms are frequently absent from mainstream discourse, but are central to comprehending the conflict. Excuse me. Now, turning to the present situation, after 6 months of the war in Gaza, with staggering casualties on both sides, where do we begin? Excuse me, I'm fasting. Firstly, we must recognize that the conflict predates, as you said, recent events and, excuse me 1 second, I have to, 1 second, I have to, some water. Sorry, I'm back. Now, I was saying that first we have to recognize that the conflict predates recent events and encompasses all segments of the Palestinian population across Gaza, the West Bank, Jerusalem, and diaspora, where millions of Palestinian refugees reside. Now, the conditions of any viable solution must be comprehensive, based on agreed upon terms such as UN resolutions and grounded in fundamental humanitarian principles, including justice, equality, and the right to self-determination. Any resolution must uphold the rights of both Palestinian and Israeli peoples to live in peace and security. Now, the notion of peace process advocated by the international community for over 7 decades has lost credibility due to its failure to implement obligations and uphold international resolutions. Consequently, the Palestinian people have lost faith in UN institutions and resolutions. Hence, any call for peace must go beyond rhetoric, outlining practical steps, a specific timeline, credible guarantees for implementation. Without these prerequisites, the international community risks perpetuating the Middle East conflict, potentially exacerbating it. The success of any political solution also hinges on the sincerity and impartiality of the superpowers, the primary stakeholders. Their positions must be characterized by integrity, honesty, and unwavering commitment to justice and equality, devoid of bias towards any party. Now, in closing, I implore our collective humanity to heed the plight of the over 33,000 casualties in Gaza, predominantly women and children, and distressing scenes of famine. Let us expedite a genuine political solution, commencing now with an immediate ceasefire. Thank you for your attention.
All right, thank you very much for those comments. And I know that we'll have an interesting discussion proceeding from this. William, would you like to take up the chair next?
Yes, thank you. Well, as I was saying, I traveled to Gaza a lot in my life, many more times than I can remember, and to Israel and to the West Bank. So these are areas and what to say? I mean, we have this situation, this crisis in which people are starving in Gaza. Friends of mine, I mean, there are people who are actually eating herbs and leaves, you know, in Gaza. They're gathering from the fields where they can. It's difficult to do so. And Israel has stated just today that it will open the Eretz crossing. You know that there are a couple of crossings into Gaza. The Eretz one is the one to the, I suppose you call it to the north, the one closest to mainstream Israel. And it's planning to open this crossing and allow aid in through this crossing. This was since I will get to the future governance of Gaza, but I too want to set the context. This was since the deliberate killing of aid workers from World Food Kitchen just the other day, to discourage this week, to discourage Europe's Cyprus-Gaza link. I think I cannot overstress the importance of this maritime link, because if it were established, it would give self-respect to the Palestinians, because they would have a port of some kind through which aid could come. I mean, admittedly, it would be inspected by Israel in Cyprus. That's part of the agreement. But nonetheless, aid could come that would give them some sense of dignity. And it's something that people have campaigned for years. At the moment, everything that comes into Gaza, the vast bulk of it, comes through the Rafah crossing through Egypt. But the lorries have to get into the Rafah crossing. They have to travel into Israel first, be inspected in Israel, then travel back into Egypt and cross into Gaza. So it's enormously difficult for aid transported in through Egypt, and it's not happening. As you know, it's the lorries are not getting through. I say the deliberate targeting of the World Food Kitchen workers because they were targeted over a stretch of ground over a mile in length. First one car, then the drone moved over to the next car and targeted that, and then the drone moved over to the next car and targeted that. So this is not some random or AI thing. I mean, there's been a lot of talk today about the fact that Israel was using a targeting system called Lavender to target Gazans, particularly who had any association with Hamas, Gazan males, whether they were waking or sleeping or whatever, and even if they had met or seemed to have met Hamas members, they were targeted, which accounted for the huge numbers of buildings demolished in the early days, because everyone in which one of these people lived was demolished.
Are they killed?
Yes, and killed. But so we have a lot of difficulties, and let me say too, the mental health impact is enormous. Last time I was in Gaza, I experienced what was called a sonic bomb. I was in my hotel room and I ran downstairs because the force of the explosion was so immense that the whole building shook, and I thought we were under attack. And I grabbed my passport, ran downstairs to the hotel lobby and to head out into the street, and I noticed everybody was just behaving as normal, walking around. And I said, but what, that huge explosion? And they explained, no, that's a sonic bomb. What that means is that a jet was flying very, very, very low at supersonic speed across the building, and it created this boom. And I said, but, and they said, no, it happens all the time. We're used to it, but it affects the children. It affects the children because they're frightened to go out in the playgrounds. Now, this is before the Gaza war, of course, but this is regular now with the Gaza war ongoing. The drones hum day and night constantly. I'm not talking about the bombing. The bombing is one thing. The drones, to drive you mad, actually. At any one time, there are more than 100 drones over Gaza. And the mental health consequences of the constant buzzing of the drones, they're not just, by the way, Israeli drones. They're also American drones and British drones over Gaza. So there are a huge number of drones gathering intelligence there, and it is almost intolerable. But yeah, I have 3 very close friends in Gaza, Wael and Adel and Ahmed. Ahmed is in Rafah now with his family, living in rough conditions. Adel has managed to get his wife and children out amazingly. And he's just stayed behind himself. And while his wife and all his children were killed and by bombing. So,
Well,
you know, I mean, this is,
well,
yeah, well done. These are my friends. So I feel it, of course. The USA, I mean, though it supplies arms to Israel, is not really. It's committed to. It has not restarted its unrefunding in full. There are little bits and pieces going through the UN Relief and Works Agency provides most of the funding for food in Gaza, for feeding people in this time of war, and at other times too. I mean, Gaza is a kind of landlocked prison, the size of the Isle of Wight in the United Kingdom. I don't know a comparable area, but it's very, very small, with these couple of million people in it. It's charming to go there. You would love it because you would be treated as very, very special. People will cross the road to shake your hand because they never see foreigners. Apart from aid workers go from compound to compound, so they never see foreigners in the street. Diplomats who travel there, and very few do, go from compound to compound. So for a Gazan to meet a foreigner is remarkable, and they cross the road to talk to you. What to say? I mean, people are disappointed, obviously, in President Biden. Donald Trump has arguably a more sympathetic position than Biden. He at least says that the war, he startled the Israelis in a recent interview and surprised them by saying the war must end swiftly and we must start peace negotiations. That's, I mean, yeah, to the surprise of Israel. The Arab governments, all the Arab governments tacitly back the war, tacitly back Israel through their silence. The governments of the Arab world are really silent on this situation. But the diminution of Hamas, the ending of Hamas, is virtually impossible unless you kill more than the conservatively estimated 34 or 35,000 killed so far in Gaza. Why is it impossible? Because you have too many adult males that are part of Hamas or that sympathize with Hamas. So what is the situation for the future governance of Gaza? Well, a lot of proposals have been made. There was a proposal being floated around that Canada should, because Canada has done work of this kind before, should take up the role of handling the manning of security at the borders with Israel and provide some sort of security force. There have been many proposals. One of the least credible proposals is that the Palestinian Authority should take over. Why is that? Because actually the Palestinian Authority is very weak. It's ruled by a man who has been kept in place by the international community, which does not want to see strong leadership in Palestine. So Abu Mazen has been in power for decades. He's older than I am, and you can see by my white beard. I mean, he's considerably older than I am. I look young by comparison to Abu Mazen. And yet he continues to rule Palestine. I can appreciate the fact that it would be very hard for the international community to tolerate democratic elections in Gaza, let alone in Palestine as a whole, because they would possibly elect people we did not like, which is what they did before when they elected Hamas. So I appreciate that it's virtually impossible for us to allow full democratic elections, but it is possible for us to allow the Gazans and the Palestinians as a whole to have presidential elections. Who would win if you allowed free and fair presidential elections? Undoubtedly, in my view, Marwan Barghouti, the imprisoned Palestinian Nelson Mandela type figure. Now, he's not people say he won't be released. Israel does not want strong leadership in Palestine. But if you want to control Hamas, if you want something other than ongoing Hamas control, you have to allow strong presidential leadership in Palestine. The answer is to have a new president for Palestine and Palestinian governance for Gaza. Now, people talk about a government of technocrats temporarily. I don't think that's enough. I think in the present climate, you need to appoint a single governor for Gaza. Somebody quite ruthless. I've always advocated the appointment of somebody like Dahlan, who is the United Arab Emirates protege, but I don't think the international community would tolerate him. He's ruthless. He has a history of running Gaza. He knows Gaza. He's a Gazan. Not an easy man. And I've remembered, I've had discussions with him about the release of a particular prisoner once many years ago, and I remember he's a very ruthless man. He pointed his finger at me and he said, William, if I had him, I would kill him. So, he's not exactly what you call flavor of the month, but you have to put in somebody strong enough to handle Hamas if you want to handle Hamas. It has to be a Palestinian. You're not going to get Canadian troops walking the streets of Gaza to be shot at. You're not going to get Emirati troops or Egyptian troops or Turkish troops walking the streets of Gaza you're not going to get it. Nor are you going to get Israelis walking the streets of Gaza to be shot at. Israel is losing soldiers on a daily basis in this ongoing war. And how can you make how can you give a Palestinian governor strength? Just give him the purse strings. I mean, who is funding Gaza? Qatar, the state of Qatar. And the United Arab Emirates has said it will step in. Qatar has been doing it for years. And the UAE has said it will step. UAE, who funded the one ship. We look forward to President Biden's ship or ships that he's promised, but he hasn't started building he hasn't started doing anything yet. He's all mouth, really. He has yet to do anything, in my view. So we need a Palestinian governor. We need an end to the war, obviously. And this has to take place at some point. You're not going to be able to push all the Gazans out of Gaza into Egypt. Egypt will not tolerate that solution. Why? Because Egypt is itself vulnerable, itself shaky. It's not going to take 2 million Gazans. So, that idea, which is something that I know many would like and was being pushed around by America at one point, early on in this conflict, that idea is just not a non-starter. So, nor are you going to kill 2 million Gazans. It's not an answer. So, there has to be an end. There has to be a solution. The solution is Palestinian governance, and the current Palestinian Authority is too weak, is massively too weak to govern Gaza. And so that's the question, is whether you and I in the international community are going to back new governance for Gaza. A peace process, we need a two-state solution. Of course we do. But that is a separate issue. We need a two-state solution to the Palestinian crisis, and we've needed one since 1948, as Jaffa said. But that's a separate issue. We need now to get on with dealing with the future governance of Gaza and negotiate a peace process, as Donald Trump rightly says, as President Biden rightly says. But we need some serious action to put pressure to make this happen. Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you both for those remarks. And I think that our third panelist is not actually able to join us at the moment. So we will just proceed from here with further discussion. If people in the audience online with us would like to pose questions, you can do so in either the chat function or the Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom screen. We also have an audience here in person. So if anyone here has questions for the panelists, please we have our first question.
So I'm sorry you can't see me, but I hope you can hear me. So thinking about kind of the long-term challenges of developing a potentially healthy, maybe state possibly, but at least a sovereignly governed territory for Palestinians in Gaza. How do you view the issue of building, first of all, if possible, is it possible to ever really have serious economic development in Gaza? And in kind of a similar vein, is it possible to develop in sometime in the future a healthy civil society that could become one day perhaps a healthy small democratic state? Or is that something that's just really far out of reach? And if it is something that you see as something being potentially feasible, what does that trajectory look like? Because as I understand it, a big problem that Gaza's had historically is that there's been an effort, particularly by Israel, to keep it from really having that kind of those healthy political developments and economic developments that would allow it to become a state that might be less inclined to accept the rule of something like Hamas, who at that, in the early 2000s had better resources to be able to distribute necessities.
Could you summarize the question again, Catherine? Just because the sound was not so good here.
Yeah, it's a bit hard to pick up. I believe, Misha, you're asking about the likelihood of the development of something like a functional civil society in Gaza. What factors would be necessary, and how likely is it to lay that kind of a basis for further political development? Yeah,
that's a good way of summarizing.
Jaffa, do you want to go first?
Well, yes, briefly. For those who do not know Gaza, if you look at the pictures, Gaza before 2000 before 7 October 2003, you can see the signs of first of all the big malls they have on this side of infrastructure. On the other side of the human resources, we have a lot of intellectuals in Gaza. Gaza used to have a middle class flourishing for the past years, until the recent years when Israeli government started this campaign of taking over Aqsa Mosque and putting more restrictions on the Gazans and in West Bank, which turned the Palestinians, I think, to radicalism. But in general, bear in mind that the Palestinian people in Gaza are the same as any people in the world. They have middle class. They look at Hollywood. They watch TVs. They have their as you said, civil society. But again, the civil society does not flourish if there are always restrictions over there. Restrictions which prevented the flourishing of civil society in Gaza. Thank you.
and if I could sort of add to that question, you had both mentioned the problem of leadership and the necessity of installing a powerful and a competent leader. But it seems to me one of the difficulties in identifying that kind of leader is that, a couple of generations of emerging leaders have pretty much been jailed or otherwise sort of ruled out of politics at the same time that you have policies that tend to sort of radicalize parts of the population. So it leaves this kind of gap there that civil society isn't able to generate, people who can step up in that role because the resources aren't there and the obstacles are. And I wonder if that seems right to you or if I'm missing something here.
No, very, very correct. I mean, the problem of jailing credible leaders it's a major problem, and the good people who would be in leadership in Palestine are, yes, they are jailed, and for me anyway, the seminal one is Marwan Barghouti. I knew him, I know him, I haven't seen him since he's been in prison, though I've asked to visit him in prison many times. And I know his family, and he is a very special man, quite charismatic and much loved in Palestine, and he would have some strong leadership. I mean, if you had a situation where somebody who was a good technocrat like Salam Fayyad was prime minister and Marwan Barghouti was president, I think we might have a really strong government in Palestine. But the present government is a joke. Democracy is much more difficult, true democracy, because it's hard to tolerate. I mean, before, I remember being in Gaza when Fatah were in control, and they were quite ruthless, by the way, and that's what strengthened Hamas for the Hamas takeover. I was actually in Gaza at the time of the war between Fatah and Hamas. At the time when Fatah was in control, the most popular group in Gaza were Islamic Jihad, the Iranian group. And the second most popular, I would say, were Hamas. And the third were the PFLP, People's Front for the Liberation of Palestine. But Islamic Jihad does not stand in elections. Now, I wouldn't be surprised if Fatah weren't quite popular in Gaza. They've had many years of Hamas control, and they probably like a change. In Gaza, Hamas is popular in the West Bank. I would imagine that Islamic Jihad remains popular in Gaza, though I have no way of currently assessing that. I don't think anybody does really. But Islamic Jihad, as I say, don't stand for elections. But Hamas are very important politically, which is why we cannot tolerate democratic elections in Palestine. But civil society is strong and must be encouraged. And we have really discouraged, I think, civil society. There's not enough funding of independent civil society organizations, not enough help to boost them, and they really need it. There's a huge need for this work. Yes.
Thank you for that. I see that we have a couple of participants who have hands raised. I'm not sure that I can enable other people to speak on the webinar, but if you can put your questions either in chat or in Q&A while we look at the technical aspects.
We can enable them, yes.
Okay.
Let me see.
Because in some webinar formats, they can't. We have a hand raised thing here, but I can't see them, so I don't.
I'm sorry, give us just a few seconds. Abdel Mohsen has raised it. Okay, Mr. Abdel Mohsen, you can speak your question or comment.
Yeah, thank you very much. I thank the two speakers. They spoke, although briefly, but comprehensively and honestly. Thanks to both of them. Now, the conflict seems in many ways to be complicated, but if we deal with the fundamentals, the fundamental what should be considered as basic human rights of all parties, then there is a way. It's not very simple, but in a way, it is far simpler than it seems. The Arab Initiative of 2002, 2004, all it calls for is for Israel to abide by international law, to go back to the 67 borders. If this could happen and the settlements given to the Palestinians, evacuated from the Israelis and given to the Palestinians, this is a huge move on the Israeli society, I know. But this is a small price for the price paid by the Palestinians along the 70 years until today. And the reward for Israel would be huge, would be political gains, security gains, huge economic gains. It would be actually the first gainer of the Arab Initiative, which was approved by all Arab countries and all Muslim countries, including Iran. So this is the first and basic thing that can solve the whole thing across all lines. The second thing, when we say we cannot tolerate elections because it can bring Hamas, this is contradictory. I cannot tolerate it. Free elections should occur under the new historic changes that should occur in Palestine and Israel. Anyone who wins the election democratically should abide by the rules of the new setting, the new international, new implementation of international law, whether he is coming from Hamas, Jihad, Fatah, or any other thing. But this is a basic human right for the people to choose their leaders. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Farhat. I wonder if either of our speakers would like to address the points that you've just raised.
Jaffa, do you want to? No? I will say something. I mean, Abdul Mohsen is speaking from Cairo. I know Abdul Mohsen, and he is right that the Arab Initiative is enormously important. It is an enormously important initiative. Obviously, originally thought of as the Crown Prince Abdullah initiative. It was adopted by the Arab League as the Arab Initiative, and it's an initiative that Saudi Arabia initiated and is visionary in its way. And as all it needs to be is the framework for the basis of the start of peace and for peace talks. It doesn't have to mean that Israel has to commit to emptying every settlement or whatever, or having a right of return for every Palestinian, but allowing peace talks to begin on that basis, or indeed on any basis, allowing peace talks to begin for a two-state solution to the Palestinian issue is essential. The tragedy is that the present Prime Minister of Israel only believes in a one-state solution. And that's all very well. I'd be the first to say, let's have a one-state solution along with him, if he meant equal rights for all the citizens of the one state. But he doesn't. He means a one state, and you know this, I know this. He means a single state under which Palestinians live in much as they do now, in as second-tier citizens. And you cannot have a two-tier state. It was tried in South Africa. It's not sustainable for generation after generation. If you had an honest one-state solution, fine, but it's not going to happen. There are Jewish idealists that have argued for a one-state solution, but it's not going to happen. So I strongly believe in a two-state solution. Sorry.
Thank you very much. Jafar, did you want to respond to this as well, or?
Yes, one word I need to add regarding the peace process or peaceful solution, which is always being thrown in the air every now and then The Palestinians, I guess now this time, after these sufferings, they would, as I said in my word, they need three main conditions with any peace process. First of all, outlining practical steps. I mean, it's not rhetoric only to say what we're calling for a peace process. Let's go to the round table and discuss. And this will go on for years and years, since also 30 years now, ongoing peace process. So we have there should be three main conditions: outlining practical steps, a specific timeline for, and then a credible guarantees for implementation. Without these three steps, the talking about peace process would be really buying time rather than really committing themselves to peace. Thank you.
Thank you for that. The next speaker that I can see on my screen who's raised his hand for a question is identified here as Ramsey. So I'm going to enable this for you. And you should be able to talk.
Let's see if it's working. Do you hear me?
Yes.
Fantastic. Thank you. Greetings to William, Veronica, Abdul Mohsen, and Jafar indeed. Three questions. They are very brief. One is really, do you think we are looking at potentially a 2 by 1 state solution, which means that indeed one state of Israel within 6-7 borders, but allowing right of return to areas within Israel, quantities to be, of course, negotiated between the two sides. And that would then give Israel an opportunity to demonstrate if indeed a one state under their control would actually be fair for the Palestinians or not. Kind of calling a bluff, I suppose, or demonstrating what they mean in a mini form or a micro form. Second question is the issue of governance a red herring? At the end of the day, is the unacceptability, not to me, I hasten to add, it doesn't matter what I think or what I accept, is the unacceptability of who is in control of the Palestinian territories a valid excuse for Israel not to end the occupation? Or is this a red herring at the end of the day? Is it perhaps in Israel's own best interest to comply with what it's under pressure to do and let the credibility of the Palestinian state be tested by international opinion, depending on how they rule themselves? And lastly, question number 3, a cost-benefit analysis. Would the kind panel do that briefly? From the Israeli perspective, where is the balance between the cost and the benefit, as Abdul Mohsen was, I think, alluding to, of withdrawing to pre-6-7 borders, entering then into full economic and commercial relations with its Arab neighbors? You'd have that line that Netanyahu drew up with his red marker through Saudi Arabia right through to the port of Haifa. And it will be a dawn of prosperity for the region. So if you look at that as a potential benefit, where is the cost? Does the cost really outweigh the benefit? What are they waiting for? I'll end there. Thank you.
All right, for either of our speakers.
For both.
William.
William first, huh? Okay. Well, I mean, yeah, I cannot believe that Israel would agree to a one-state solution with full right of Palestinian return. But there was a Geneva initiative, which I regarded as quite credible, and some of you may not, some of my Arab friends may not, but it was a discussion between, it was not a government discussion, it was a non-government discussion, in which they arrived at the idea that there should be a certain limited number of Palestinians allowed back to Israel for family reunification, and that other than that, all Palestinians should be allowed a right of return to Palestine, or compensation, or a right to go to some other country, all Palestinians that are in camps now currently in places like Lebanon, where sadly they are also second-class citizens. I mean, many of the displaced Palestinians do not have full rights in the camps in which they find themselves for generations. So there's that issue. But what's in it's in Israel's best interest, yes, to have a two-state solution, in my view, on a cost-benefit basis. If I were heading up Israel, I would withdraw from the Sheba farms, and which is a small part of Lebanon that Israel still occupies, and I would actually make the Golan Heights into a park, and which is something that some Israeli generals have proposed, with shared sovereignty with Syria, and Syria will probably accept that. And I would actually, if I were heading up Israel, yes, I would recognize a Palestinian state, and I would keep some of my settlements, but I would let others go, and I'd do it almost unilaterally and allow Gaza freedom, because so that it could run its own affairs. That's what I would do if I were, but I'm not heading up Israel. It would be a dream, the idea that international law was respected, if you like to call it that. Resolutions 242 and 338. But it's not really going to be respected. So I think the Palestinians should take what they can get and pocket it. And I think states around the world should do what they can to help Palestine by recognizing a Palestinian state. And Israel was recognized in 1948 without a constitution, without borders, and without a capital. And Palestine can be recognized on the same basis. I know that the only Western country to recognize a Palestinian state currently is Sweden, the only prominent Western country. Sweden, if you call Sweden prominent. But I know that at the moment, Spain and Ireland are considering recognition of a Palestinian state. I think this should be done before a peace process by more Western nations. Because why? Because it would cement the moves towards a two-state solution. And the two-state solution is in Israel's best interests, in my view. In Israel's best interests, if you're talking about the children of Israel, do they want to live in this kind of situation forever? I cannot see that it's in Israel's interests.
Jafar, did you want to address this one as well?
Well, yes, briefly. I'm not sure if the two-state solution is still viable. With more than 700 settlers in West Bank, with more confiscating of lands by Israel in the West Bank. Now even Gaza, Israel, in spite of the warnings by United States not to take any part of Gaza as a buffer zone, but Israel has done it. So at the same time, we can tell that the tendency inside Israel is towards far right, from right to far right. So it's making more difficult for any kind of compromise. So if the compromise is to have two-state solution, is not accepted by the right government now in Israel. Now we have far right. So what do you expect? As you know, we predict it's prediction that if elections would take place, I mean, most of the Israelis now, they will turn to the right more. So I have always reservations regarding the refugees on the other side. The refugees who are, around Lebanon, Jordan, Syria. When you look, when the Palestinians in these camps, I always say this, he sees some people coming to Israel from all over the world just because they have they are Jews and they are granted citizenship and they granted house, land. This creates bitterness among the Palestinians in the camps, in the refugee camps around in Lebanon, Syria, everywhere, in Jordan. And when they look, they cannot even visit their places of birth. So there's injustice in this. Excuse me.
It's interesting, isn't it? Just to add a point, I mean, my friends in Gaza would.
Do I finish it if you don't mind?
Oh, sorry, you had something else, Jafar, to say.
Yeah.
Sorry, go on.
I'm saying the despair and bitterness will create an environment for more violence in the future. That's it.
I think just to add the point, I mean, I do speak to my friends in Gaza, and occasionally, not as often as I would like, because it's very difficult. But they would accept anything if it meant an end to violence. Anything. I mean, the Gazans, even before this war, were willing to accept anyone, Fatah, whatever, because they'd been half a lifetime in confined conditions where they can't go out of the Gaza Strip. I mean, they would accept anything, even then, and now most certainly anything, just to end this tragic situation. Offer them anything, and they will take it. They live in incomprehensibly difficult conditions. I don't know how I can express this to you. Last time I was in Gaza, I saw a building site. You know, the building site was they were building. They were getting their materials, so they used a JCB, a big crane to drag from a bomb site to drag the iron out of the demolished building and then pull it through an enormous vise. And then the rubble from the building, they put in molds on the ground because they could only smuggle in a little cement. And then they used the little bit of cement with rubble to mix with rubble to make breeze blocks. I mean, their ingenuity is amazing. But it is a very hard place to live. It's very hard. It would make you weep to keep all these people in prison. Anyway, sorry.
I see that we have a follow-up question from Abdul Mohsen Farahat, but we also have a couple of students in attendance. So I want to make sure that they know that they can ask questions as well, and make a little space for the students if they have anything they'd like to ask our speakers. If you don't want to speak, you can pop it in the chat. But while you're thinking about that, Dr. Farahat, let me click on this so that you can talk again.
Yeah, 2 points. In order to guarantee the absence of radicalism from the Palestinian side, you must give them their rights. I wonder, please correct me, what is the experience with the Irish Republican Army? I'm sure Britain didn't want any Irish representative to be from the Irish Republican Army. But once a legal deal to be abided by all parties was reached, then representatives of the Irish Republican Army took over authority. This is my understanding. Please correct me. So in my opinion, for the security of Israel, international law must be applied equally to the two parties, not only what is convenient for Israel. And to be clearer on that, I don't see the possibility of implementing international law on Israel except through sanctions and strong sanctions, embargo on arms, economic sanctions, on settlements. That settlements is a crime. It shouldn't be played with that it's more convenient for Israel to keep the settlements and give a part of the Negev desert to the Palestinians. This is a preparation for another stage in the conflict. Solve the conflict immediately by being completely strict in applying international law. Golan Heights should go back to Syria without question, not two securities, two sovereignties on the same land. This would lead to another conflict and another possibility. The same thing, by the way, for marine rights, natural gas in the Mediterranean. It should belong to the concerned people according to international law. No stealing of natural resources, underground water, natural gas, etc. This would lead to real peace and real justice. Thank you.
Thank you. Turning it back to our speakers then.
Okay. Do you want to go first, Jaffa? Oh, you're muted anyway. Well, you unmute yourself. I'll go first. No, you can go second. What was I going to say? It's international law is a dream. It has never been implemented. Anywhere in the universe has international law, unless it's in the interests of the United States of America. Otherwise, international law, and USA is still our superpower. It is the world superpower. And unless international law is in the interests of the United States of America, it does not ever get implemented. So this, you have to speak to President Biden or the incoming President Trump, Abu Mohsen. I mean, you know full well that under international law, Jerusalem would be an independent city. That is the legal position in international law, and remains a corpus separatum under UN Security Council resolutions. It doesn't happen. It does not happen. Now, if you want a universe where international law is recognized, ahlan wa sahlan, I'll join you, but it's not going to happen. At the moment, it is power that counts. And you may regard that with sadness, but it's a fact. So nobody is going to sanction Israel. Certainly, never mind America, nobody in Europe is going to sanction Israel. I'm speaking currently from Berlin. Germany is not going to do it. Neither is Britain, my home country. Certainly not America. Nobody, and not the Arab world, not Egypt, where you are speaking from Cairo, not Egypt, not Palestine's so-called allies in the Arab world. No Arab state now that has, well, okay, there are Arab states that don't have relationships with Israel, like Iraq, but many of them do. Oman, Saudi Arabia indirectly, Qatar, Bahrain, United Arab Emirates, Jordan. I mean, they have relationships with Morocco. They have relationships with Israel. You think they're going to sanction them? Turkey is not going to sanction Israel. It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen with Egypt, let alone anywhere else. But you are right about another thing. Gaza would be enormously prosperous if it had in a free world, because it has those enormous natural gas assets immediately offshore, and it's a strip of strategic land. It would be the Singapore of the Middle East in a free world, but we don't live in a free world. We live in a world that is dominated by America and America's choices, and that is a fact, and remains a fact for the foreseeable future, in my view. But so it's an American decision. I think. Jaffar's shaking his head. Do you want to come in?
Yeah, may I? Oh, I don't know if I may ask.
Yeah, please,
Catherine,
please.
if I
Ahlan
may.
wa sahlan.
So do we advocate power of right or right of power? So if the United States now is dominating the world by its power, so you can imagine in 20 years old, in 20 years time, other powers would come over and will take over United States, and then they will tear all these resolutions which will be implemented now. If it is, that's why we always ask for just and lasting peace. Because if the peace is not based on justice, it will not last. This is the point. We advocate for just and lasting peace. Now, I said in my statement that there should be agreed upon terms. Otherwise, I mean, everyone, if you wants to, Israel would depend on its alliance with the United States, a superpower. Then in 20 years, we don't know. Maybe Iran will be superpower. Maybe Korea. Now, I don't know. Russia, whoever. So I think it is better for us to advocate for a power of right rather than right of power. Thank you.
Do you know what I would daydream of? I would dream of a peace based on mercy and compassion. I think that even would trump justice. If we just had a little compassion and care, then it would be a better world. And that's what we need. A little more love and care to regard the other as us, as we regard ourselves. Treat others like we think of ourselves.
If we can.
I see that we have one more follow-up question from Abdul Mohsen Farahat, and I'm sorry, but we are very nearly out of time, and I want to make sure that our two speakers get the chance to leave us with any concluding remarks they'd really like us to have as the takeaway for how we should be thinking about the future of governance in Gaza.
Where are we going first? Do you want to, are we just going to go to the two speakers, or do you want to Abdul Mohsen to come in, Catherine?
Well, I think because we're so short on time, it might just have to be the two of you. But if we were going to have, if you're going to leave us with one takeaway for what we should expect, what is it?
Okay. Jaffer, you first or me first?
Well, I believe what I expect. I expect that the world is learning that the more neglecting the main issues, the more instability in the world would prevail. After Gaza, there's a big lesson I think the world is learning, especially, unfortunately, I don't know, after the killing of the aid workers in Gaza, suddenly the West, especially the United States, waked up and asked Israel to be more careful. So I think, is it possible that this big numbers of casualties, the destruction in Gaza will make the world more aware of the causes of instability in the world, especially in Palestine? And then we are seeing some signs of this awareness, and then they would act accordingly. This is my assumption. At the beginning, I was pessimistic, but lately, I think the world now, especially especially the United States, is watching what is going on in the Middle East. About maybe the war may escalate to a regional war with Iran. maybe this would provoke them to put all efforts together to find a just and lasting solution to the Palestinian issue. Thank you.
Thank you for that.
Well,
William,
briefly,
think
I
you
mean, yes, thank you. I mean, 2024 is an enormously important year worldwide because of the number of elections in key countries that are taking place. Obviously, in the United States of America, and certainly in Britain by the end of 2024, or maybe the latest it can go is January 2025. We have British elections. And we will see elections in Israel, I believe, by the end of 2024. We will see a new prime minister in Israel. And I think therein lies an element of hope. The Netanyahu cannot hold on forever. The coalition will, I believe, fall apart before the end of 2024. Does this mean that the Gazan war ends? I think it probably does, because a deal will be done and the hostages will be brought home, well, those that remain alive. And the future governance of Gaza then is on the table. And that's when the international community, President Biden, because Biden will still be president until January 2025, President Biden has to man up and step forward and really put the pressure on for a stable, long-term solution, a peace process, and for honest and fair governance for Gaza. And President Biden can do that in a way nobody else can. If we wait for President Trump, who is, I think, inevitably going to be your next president, is sitting here as an outsider, I don't know. I mean, it would be shameful that Biden doesn't step up to the mark on his watch while he still has this opportunity to do so. And I hope and pray, and all my prayers, and I go that President Biden will prove himself worthy on this issue, because it is in America's gift. Peace in the Middle East is in America's gift. Don't pretend it's anybody else's. It is your government. You are, America is the world superpower. That may change, as Jaffa says, in 20 years, but it has not changed yet. And that is the situation as of now. You can make a difference.
All right, I see that we are out of time, so I have it just remaining to thank both of our speakers. You've given us an awful lot to think about, and we really appreciate your expertise and your commentary on this, and to thank also the participants in our panel. We're going to end the session now, and I hope that you will all join us for some of the later sessions also online. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye.